Yeah, I'm here. I'm just moving some stuff around. All right, thank you guys very much. So okay, we'll move on into the GI section. And this is a very and just kind of reiterating what you've already heard from both GI and MSK is that I had 71 studies that were submitted or cases that were submitted to my section. They were really just phenomenal. It was really hard to pick one that showed really great rad-path correlation to kind of explain why we're seeing what we see on imaging. And so this happened to be the best case, but there were so many just phenomenal cases. You should all be really, really proud of yourselves. This patient is a 36-year-old female. She comes in with decreased appetite, early satiety, and some weight loss. And so she has imaging done. You can see on the left an axial that's kind of sliding through. And you'll notice that the gastric antrum is clearly abnormal. We've got some wall thickening. We're able to see that on the coronal as well, where we can see that there's some wall thickening centrally. And then on the sagittal, if we kind of follow where the arrow is and sort of look at the lumen, we can see that the lumen is narrowed. So we have what looks like a mural process within the stomach. The abnormality is primarily in the wall. When we have an abnormality in the wall, we want to see what's going on with the lumen, because really our differential diagnosis is going to be adenocarcinoma versus lymphoma. And so when we see that there's some luminal narrowing with evidence of obstruction, we want to think of adenocarcinoma first. That desmoplastic reaction causes narrowing associated with it. But if we look at the tumor is, it's really kind of quite expansile. And it's relatively hypoattenuating, right? We can see the mucosas here. We can see there's a little area of ulceration. I'll show that better later. So we have a mass. It has an area of ulceration. It has luminal narrowing. So really our differential diagnosis would still be adenocarcinoma versus lymphoma. Arguing against lymphoma would be that there's not significant lymphadenopathy here. So eventually they did biopsy. They treated the patient preoperatively, and then were able to do a total gastrectomy. Here you can see once they open the stomach, these are just the rugal folds, some areas of hemorrhage within them. And as we get towards the antrum, we can see that there's this wall thickening, this sort of very white looking material that's within the wall underneath the layer of the mucosa. So this is a submural component, but we also see that there's this focal irregular ulceration within this lesion. Under the microscope at low power, you can see this is the gastric wall. And it's quite thick here. We can focus in on the mucosa. Here's the mucosa, but it's really quite abnormal. And then as we come here, we sort of see there's a break in the mucosa where there's no normal mucosa here. And that's that ulceration that we saw on the gross specimen. Now, as we zoom in this area here, what we can see is we see that kind of edge of the ulceration, and we're kind of focusing in on that mucosa that's abnormal. We can see that there's something kind of infiltrating throughout the wall. It's not really mass forming, and it's not really homogeneous, right? So it's very heterogeneous, where we have, almost these sort of round things kind of infiltrating with some inflammatory cells. And so we have a more heterogeneous appearance. And as we zoom up even more, what we see is what these are, these little abnormal glands of different shapes. They're infiltrating within the lamina propria and then also infiltrating through the muscular layer. As we kind of zoom in a little lower, we can see this is the muscular layer. So we're infiltrating into the muscle. We're going throughout the lamina propria. And lo and behold, when we look a little bit more closely, there are some areas where we have intracellular mucin pushing that the nucleus over to the edge. And so these are those typical signet ring cells, which are characteristic and portend a poor prognosis. And so all of these features together are consistent with the diffuse type of gastric adenocarcinoma with the signet ring cells. Remember that our primary differential diagnosis, and when we're looking at this, we might say, well, this is pretty massive wall thickening. And I agree with you, but the signs of obstruction and the fact that if it had this degree of involvement, you'd absolutely expect to see bulky adenopathy. That would be a diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. And with those, we should see adenopathy. So really, when we see this mural involvement of the stomach, we want to think of lymphoma as the differential diagnosis. This is really the primary differential diagnosis. But again, you should see this sort of more homogeneous wall thickening. See how this is more hypoattenuating. And it's quite bulky, which is characteristic of the signet ring cell component. And again, we expect to see big bulky lymph nodes with a lymphoma. So this case was submitted by Dr. Sadaf Sahrayan. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Gastric adenocarcinoma of the diffuse type with the signet ring cells. Thank you. It was a really lovely case.